In this video, we'll talk about how to create a custom view on iOS. Now, the first thing we'll do is to create a subclass of an existing UI control or any subclass, basically any subclass on UI view. Like we mentioned, it could be the custom class that you already defined, or any of the UI controls like UI label or UI buttons, or some other even more complicated UI kit components like UI collection view. Now, of course, we have to import a UI kit for that. And the UI controls that we're going to do is this authentication text field that we created for mini project 3. So we'll basically be doing a copy of that. Now we will create a subclass by declaring a class auth text field and use a column, or declare it as a subclass of UI view. Now, if you're not planning on further subclassing this auth text field, you can declare it as a final. A final class basically means that there's not going to be any subclass of this class, which give you a little bit performance boost when you're loading in when you're loading a compiler for the compiler optimization. Now, a custom view is very similar to the view controllers, adding controls to the view controllers that we've been doing for a while now. And it's basically the same deal. You will create an instance variable. For example, for our custom control, we will have a text field at the bottom and a label right here. So first we'll create a text field, and let's just name it text field, and it's of type UI text field. We'll use the same method, creating it initializing it with a closure, and the text field would be a UI text field, just like this. And we will further customize our text field with the built-in instance variable with the built-in properties. So the text field border style, we don't want the border line, so we will set it to none, and we will set the background color to be the color that we defined. It's F7 gray, and the text color will be the primary text that we define in our utility, in our extension. So this is the primary text. It's a UI color. And we also define the font to be the system font of size, let's say 15, and weight medium. Now we can also declare constants when setting font size like this, just in case like in the future we might need it, and it's nice to have like a default global value inside. So we will call it default font size. If you're familiar with C, this is basically how C, the naming convention of a global variable or constant. We'll use all capped, and you can also declare a type. In this case, because it's a font, we'll use CG float, and it's 15.0. Here we will use replace the 15.0 with the default font size that we declared. And because we don't want it to autocorrect, because sometimes like when you're typing a password, it's pretty annoying to have the keyboard autocorrect or auto capitalize what you type. So we will disable both of that behavior. Set auto capitalization type to none, and the auto correction type to no. And finally, because we're using auto layout or using constraints, we will set the translate auto resizing max into constraint to false to avoid constraint conflict. Finally, we'll return the text field just like this. Finally, Next, we will also want to create a title label. Again, this is very similar to what we've been doing. You just want to create a UI label and initialize a label, customize it. And in this case, because our auth will only have one line, we can explicitly set the number of lines to be 1. And in the label, text alignment, let me return it first. The text alignment should be aligning to the left, so the font. Now here, because we're making it a little bit smaller, make the title a little bit smaller than the default font size, we can use the global constant that we just declared. And by the way, the file private modifier, the file private access modifier means that this constant is only accessible within this Swift file. So basically the scope of this class. And here offsides, default font size -2, and the weight will be semi-bold. So here we set it to medium. The text of this one will be medium, and this one will be semi-bold. Since it's a little bit smaller, we can make it a little bit thicker. So label, we also want to set translate auto resizing mask into constraint to false. And here is our the two controls that we'll be using for this text field. Now, next step, we want to create the an initialization process for our auth text field, because if you recall from our website, let me just pull down real quick a little bit. If we recall from our website, we want to be able to initialize an auth text field with only the title, which is a string. Now, the default UI view obviously doesn't support this because it makes no sense for a UI view to support an initializer like that. So we need to declare our own initializer for our custom view. And if you recall from the our discussion like 2 weeks ago about initializer, you know that we have two types of initializer: the convenience initializer and the designated initializer. Technically, you can do both. You can choose like either one of them, but for this demo, we will use the designated initializer. And because we'll be using the designated initializer, we will need to set a frame. We'll need to grab a frame from the initializer as well, but we can set it a default value to 0. Then we will also provide the option to create a title, which is here. And for designated initializer, you will have to call the superclass designated initializer before self becomes accessible. That's the two-phase initialization we talked about. And for this one, super init frame is the designated initializer of the superclass of the UI view superclass. It's available for every UI view, so you could just call it with the frame that we got. And by default, if we don't use that parameter, we don't pass in an argument for frame, this frame will be set to 0, and this will be 0. Now we have delegated the designated initializer. We will set the title of our title label. Now, because we want to think about how will people interact with our custom view, we will often design the API, design the interface for interactions like that, because we want to be able to we don't want people to have to say auth text field dot text field set title. Instead, it should support an interface such as set title, which can directly set the title of the text field from outside. So I'll show you what I mean by giving you a function, by defining a function set title. So here, instead of going into text field and set the title, other people can call this function, which is implemented under the auth text field, to set the title. And we'll be using that for our initializer as well. right? So this will increase code reusability, among other things. Title label dot text should be title dot, let's make it uppercase so that we have, like in our design, everything is uppercase. And also, do we need size to fit? Actually, I don't think so. This should be like this. All right. So in the initializer, we will call the set title on with the title argument. So this will set the title. And the next step, we will have to create a configure function that will configure, like add the subviews to for our custom view. And the reason being, we not only wanted to be able to support adding a title, we also wanted to be able to do the usual initialization with only frame. So we will also want to override init with the frame. Remember, this initializer is provided under the is provided with UI view, so we're overriding it because like previously this initializer doesn't do anything. If we don't override it, we will essentially get an empty UI view when other people initialize it with this initializer, and that is not what we want, right? Because if you don't initialize it with a title, it should give you a text field without the title, right? So this is something that we're gonna fix by overriding the frame initializer here. And by overriding frame initializer, remember to also call, because frame initializer is also a designated initializer. Remember also you want to call the superclass frame initializer, just like that. Because you override the frame init, you'll also have to override the required coder init. Now, coder init adds support for interface builder. In this case, it's pretty harmless to just like call the coder and call the configure function that will be defined. So here we will have a private function configure. So here we have configure. And this is where all of the configurations are gonna live, like add the subviews and set out the constraints. And we'll call configure from all three branches of our initializer so that we get consistent behavior from, all three of the initializer. So configure, the first step will be adding the subviews, the text field, as well as the title label. After adding the subviews, we will need to activate the constraints. We'll call nsdl constraint.activate, and just like that. The title label, leading anchor, will be constrained to the leading anchor of the view. Notice now I don't need to say view.leading anchor anymore because self in this case is the view. Like the only reason we need to call view.leading anchor when we're calling it from the view controller is because in view controllers, like for example in view.load, self is referring to as the view controller instance. And the view controller is not a view, it's a controller, it's a subclass of UI view controller. Now, since we are creating a subclass of UI view, we could just use self to refer to the instance, to the view instance, right? So here we just need to call the leading anchor. Then similarly, we'll pin the top anchor to the top anchor of our view, the trailing anchor, trailing anchor to the trailing anchor of our view. And now the text field, we also want to set the leading anchor to be the leading anchor. The bottom anchor to be the bottom anchor. and sorry, it should be text field, and the text field's trailing anchor to the trailing anchor of our view. Now we also want to set the spacings between the two views, so it will be the title labels dot bottom anchor constraint equal to the text field top anchor with a constant of -5, because text field is the bottom towards top is negative, so it's -5. All right, here we have, I think we have most of the stuff ready, and we can try to add it to our view controller just to see what it looks like right now. Now, keep in mind that we didn't set the width and the height of any of our views, because we're kind of relying on the intrinsic size to set the height of our custom view, and but we still need to specify the width of our custom views, right? Because otherwise this thing won't have an intrinsic width, so it won't be able to infer it, because it won't be able to infer reference content. Now we will add the text field, just like what we would do for a built-in components. We'll call it a text field. Let's say an email text field, and it is an instance of an auth text field. Initialize it with a closure. We'll call the auth text field initializer with the label, with the title, and its email. Then we will set the translate resize auto resizing master constraint to false, and finally return the text field. Inside view.load, we will add it to the subview, email text field, and also set up the constraint. And as layout constraint activates, of the constraints is gonna be let's say the leading anchor dot constraint equal to the view dot leading anchor plus an inset of let's make it 50 points. And the top ones, I'm thinking maybe we can specify the height so that we don't need to we don't need to like choose like what padding of the height is going to be, because we just want to pin it to the center. So we will do something like the text field center y anchor constraint equal to the view dot center y anchor, and the height email text field dot height anchor. Actually, I'm wondering, do we need to set a height anchor, because height could be inferred, right? So yeah, let's just try that out first. The trailing anchor constraint equal to the views dot trailing anchor with a -50, just like that. And let's run the demo. Sorry, it shouldn't be. It should be custom view like that. Sorry, missing a let and comma. Oh wait, forgot to return the label. Yeah, the auto corrections wasn't enabled because I didn't select this as the target. So we will have, well, nice. We will have a text field, and you see the height of that text field is indeed inferred. It's basically, yeah, it's the font, the height of the font plus a little margin. Now we will further customize our auth text field to make it looks better. And the way we're gonna do it, first we will set a little bit of a little bit of spacing between the left and between each size of the text field, so that it's not like this one line. To do that, we need to subclass the text field, because the editing rectangle and the text rectangle is a variable, is a function defined inside the UI text field. In order to customize it, because we can't customize a function without subclassing, we'll have to override. We'll have to subclass it and then override it. So inside this class, inside the auth text field class, I will create an inner class, a private inner class called text field. Now we talked about inner class a little bit, like 3 weeks ago. It's basically something that, inside the auth text field had to be accessed through auth text field dot text field. And now because we define it as a private, this thing won't be visible anywhere else, which is kind of what we want, because we want to be able to do, want it to be very specific for our only for this custom view, right? So here we'll override the function, the editing rec. Do I have to override func edit UI text field like that? So we should be able to override the editing rectangle, and we will return. So this is the editing rectangle for a bounds of the view. So basically, like this will be the the original rectangle for our text, and this will be the rectangle for the entire text field, and we will return a bounds for the for our the text inputs inside. So we'll return bounds dot inset by, use dxdy, so this will inset this by 20 points from the left, basically, and dy 0. And we'll also want to override the text rectangle. So this will be the placeholder rectangle, I believe, to be the same thing. Will be inset by 20 and 0. And now right here, we will instead of using UI text field, we will use the text field with define. But because we define it as a private inner class, we can use text field right here, because the static type here, the static type is going to be internal access level. And if we use private, this private, you can't have an internal variable accessing a private inner class, right? So we'll keep the static type for our text field, but inside the text field initializer, we'll initialize it to be in the concrete type will be the text field we defined. So basically like that. And let's run it again and see what it looks like. Okay, now if we start typing, you see we have an inset on our left. Now we will add padding to the top and the bottom, as well as adding the corner radius. But just as that will have to be defined, because we're basically kind of overriding its intrinsic size, because right now we're using the intrinsic size as the height of the rectangle. Now, in order to change that, we'll have to specifically give it a height, calculated, based on whether that's font size or something like that. And we'll use the font size for this example. We'll calculate the height that's needed from the default font size that we created, and we'll make it, say, 2.3 times the default font size. Now we can add additional constraint for the height. So it will be text field dot height anchor dot constraints equal to constant of the height right here, and set the is active to be true. And finally, we will set the layer corner radius so that we get the rounded edge. text field dot layer dot corner radius equal to half the height, just like that. And we should have our custom view ready like this. So this is so much for the auth text field. There are a lot of other stuff to learn about custom view. For example, like you can learn about the life cycle of, you know, how constraints work behind the scene. And there is actually something called an auto layout lifecycle, which I highly recommend. If you're interested, you should check that out, because it allows you to fine tune the layout process of your view. For example, like you'll learn that auto layout actually comprise three paths. The first one is actually solving for the constraint system. And the second one is applying the solution of the constraint system as the frame of each of the views. And then finally is rendering it onto the screen. And each of that, you can customize it through overriding functions within your custom view. For example, if I want to hook onto the second process, like applying constraint solutions to the bounds, I can call the layout. I can override the layout subviews, and this is where we're gonna, you know, do the further customization. It's very similar to the view.loads, you know, like the lifecycle of your view controller, only if we are doing the lifecycle of the custom views. Now we won't go into those details because it's pretty complicated, but just to want you guys to know that if you guys are interested, you should definitely check that out. All right, that's the end of this video, and I will see you next time.